I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Regen Network Development. I'm also on the board of Blockchain Times Climate. We're an industry group, I guess, at this point, project of the Global Blockchain Business Council. We emerged partially on the ice of Greenland several years ago and out of the forest in Colombia, where it was found that we needed a group that spanned across Web3 with a number of different players and operators building solutions for climate finance, for funding verified ecological repair, for helping disrupt in a positive way nature markets and carbon markets. But what we found, years ago, and that we've aimed to address since, is addressing issues around interoperability, around how do we get all of these passion projects, all of these businesses, all of these organizational projects to and all these different ecosystems to be able to speak with each other directly. And so out of that was formed the Blockchain Times Climate. We've hosted events in Dubai. We've done digital events. We've published papers. And today we're convening on Earth Day 2025. And I was thinking about it before I joined here about what Earth Day means here in the context of being at the intersection of blockchain and climate, where it feels like I'm feeling a bit of whiplash at the moment, where with the new administration, frankly, we've got from the crypto perspective, it seems to be more room to run, a little bit more leeway in how we approach things with maybe less burdensome regulatory environment. And on the flip side, those of us who care about climate are probably feeling the whiplash of, feeling some antagonism around what it means to address climate, through regulatory policy or through markets, with a kind of uneven, it looks like a carbon market still trying to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up, and nature markets that, where biodiversity credits are sold that are still in their infancy and trying to find their footing in volatile times. And then, of course, macroeconomically, and just the macro view of climate offer some really stark contrasts of just, I'd say volatility is the word of the day around this issue. But we are undeterred and undaunted with this group, and I wanted to make sure that I started by just saying thank you to the Global Blockchain Business Council team, GBBC, Diana and Riley and crew. Thank you all for helping put this on and all of your support, Blockchain Times Climate. And I also wanted to carve out a moment here just for our speakers to introduce themselves, and just let's be brief so we can get into the fun of things, and dig into some of the issues that sit at this intersection, this really potent intersection of how do we use blockchain to scale and make more impact when it comes to climate finance and verified ecological repair. So maybe with that, I'm going to go ahead and just go around the room here, starting with Drew to my far right. Drew, welcome. Please introduce yourselves to folks and tell us more about what you're working on.
Sure thing. Thanks, David, and thanks GBBC and Blockchain Times Climate for this opportunity. So I'm Drew. I'm the managing director at Carbonmark. Carbonmark was a spin-out from some of the early work that KlimaDAO essentially developed using blockchain to facilitate carbon market activity. A lot of what we've developed over the past year is related to automations, using smart contracts to automate purchase and retirement flows of these assets, but also to fractionalize carbon credits so that they can be embedded into other types of fintech applications, things like credit card transaction offsetting, offsetting other types of commercial activity, and so on. So really excited to see the rest of the panel here and to collaborate with you all as we further develop things along in the space. Thanks.
Great. Rohan, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what Nasdaq is peeking into when it comes to blockchain.
Sure. Thanks, David. So my name is Rohan Sherrard. I'm the principal product manager for a product called Nasdaq Private Custody. And this is a digital asset-based platform that provides a variety of market-specific solutions. Today, we have two solutions in production. One of those is a tokenized carbon registry solution for the carbon markets. And we also have tokenized government bonds for fixed income. And we are expanding upon these solutions into other markets, as well as developing out the existing solutions to provide more automation efficiency by leveraging the power of digital assets, smart contracts, blockchains, etc.
Thank you, Rohan. Belén, welcome from Oaxaca. Thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, hello everyone. Gracias Pachamama por este día especial. We are really happy to also be in this day together, gathering, talking about Mother Earth. I'm here in Oaxaca, but actually I'm from Ecuador. I've been working in the Pachamama Alliance for the last 30 years. And Fundación Pachamama has been working for the permanent protection for the Amazon region, hand by hand with indigenous peoples from the Amazon, looking at alternatives to avoid deforestation, degradation, to find a way to respect indigenous rights in the country that I am part of, Ecuador and Peru, and finding a way to do litigation for collective rights and looking at alternatives to provide improvements of livelihoods for the indigenous peoples in these areas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Belén. Great. Well, why don't I start? Drew, I'm going to start with you. You're a veteran of this space, at the intersection of climate and technology and the application of blockchain to scaling carbon markets. And I think, you and I have seen a lot of sunrises and sunsets in this industry, and a fair amount has changed and moved over the past few years. And I'd love just to get like a temperature check. Give me your weather report to start with. Are we in sunny and shiny and 75 degrees for those of us over in the States, or is it cloudy? And then give us, like, help me understand like your mindset today as you're looking across the landscape, what you're excited about and what is a little bit of a warning flag for us in this industry.
Yeah, sure. So I think 2018 is when one of my companies first got involved in this space. We were really interested in DeFi. We saw that you could essentially program digital assets to, for example, redirect yields to climate projects, right? We saw blockchain as a way to really scale up the flow of financing using various innovative methods to the industry, right? And there was sort of a golden dawn, let's say, when I think there's just a ton of activity. You had players like Moss Earth that were starting to tokenize credits and do some interesting things. You had the launch of CleanDAO and Toucan and a whole lot of players in early 2021. And there was a tremendous amount of activity then in moving these assets on chain and just exploring various use cases. But then, as I'm sure many people here know, there were moratoriums essentially placed on the activity of moving these assets onto the blockchain. And in some ways, understandably, right? Things move very, very fast in crypto and blockchain. And for an industry that's really, needs to be concerned with trust and transparency and so on, sometimes you do need to move a little bit slower to make sure that the proper stakeholders, of course, are kind of brought into these processes as they all unfold. But that really led to, let's say, the cloudy days, late 20, or let's say early 2022 to 2024 almost, where, unfortunately, those moratoriums and some of the working groups that occurred and so on just sort of petered out and didn't necessarily lead to that type of engagement that we'd really like in the industry to leverage this technology. But I think that we have some reasons to be optimistic now, right? The clouds are starting to part here. We do have a number of carbon registries, for example, that leverage blockchain technology. Some of them are even built on public chains like ICR. You also have other groups that are starting to use smart contracts and working with third-party validators and verifiers to just directly issue credits onto the blockchain. And it's something that we've actually explored at Carbonmark for really small-scale projects that maybe don't have the scale necessary to go through one of the traditional registries to issue credits. So there's a lot of interesting things that are happening right now. I think we'd still like to see maybe some more engagement from leaders in the market like AIDA and ACROA, for example, just around best practices and standards when it comes to what the tokenization of these assets looks like. But like I said, I think 2025 so far, it's been a generally optimistic time. There's a lot of collaboration happening. So curious to think what some of the other panelists see on the horizon right now, but that would be my take. Great,
Drew. Love it. Rohan, maybe pivoting over to you. You sit in Nasdaq at the belly of the beast of the markets and economic indicators of and the economic sentiment, like where the markets are at, where companies are viewing the world, how they're viewing the world, and they're doing their own temperature check as it relates and how this shows up in Nasdaq. I'm curious with Nasdaq, it seemed to, in my readings, like some was relatively early when it comes to some of the conventional actors, if you will, into peeking into blockchain and its use case for markets. Could you tell us a little bit more about Nasdaq's philosophy when it comes to emergent technologies that maybe some might kind of give a side eye to or have some suspicion around back in the day, and how Nasdaq is providing leadership, and then specifically as it relates to here on Earth Day, tokenization of carbon or other relationships to some of the climate metrics, if you will, how Nasdaq is approaching its engagement with blockchain and sustainability.
Absolutely, David. So in terms of the technology itself, Nasdaq has an active R&D division, and we often explore new technologies when they are very early in their exposure, I suppose, to the world, and try and work out how can this help us to deliver more modernized markets? How can this make processes more efficient? How can we apply this technology to reduce costs, improve efficiency, these types of things? And when it comes to blockchain, it was a long road. As we all know, blockchain has had a long history. It's had a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and we have been very focused on, we want to solve difficult problems that can't be solved using traditional technology in this space. And with that, Nasdaq has also been very keen on looking at how we can improve carbon markets, how we can modernize carbon markets. And with that, Nasdaq took a strategic investment in the standards body Pure Earth several years ago. And with that investment, we went in and we tried to work out where can we make the best impact to help this organization and then the market roll the same improvements products out to the market. How can we solve the difficult challenges, the difficult problems? And one of the areas we found was lacking was the infrastructure. Now, Nasdaq is a financial market infrastructure company. It's got a long history with hundreds of customers all around the world in traditional markets around financial market infrastructure, where efficiency and low cost is very important. And we wanted to bring those same learnings to the carbon market, but on new technology, taking in its novel characteristics around decentralization, distribution, smart contracts, these types of things. So we developed a solution for the carbon market, which would be scalable. So it had to be able to have a high degree of automation. It had to be able to provide a high degree of efficiency. And we also need these assets to be held securely, because over time, you're going to have millions, hundreds of millions, billions of assets under management held as carbon credits and carbon removal units. So we needed to ensure that what we were doing would be secure, it would be verifiable, it would have the characteristics required for the carbon markets, where they could reside on immutable ledgers, where they could be detailed data provenance and transparency, all these types of things. And there was reasons for that, where we saw we had to help solve the foundations first. And then with the foundations being solved, you can then look at, well, how can I start to increase participation? And the reason for looking at participation is the operational costs for registries today are very high, and exchanges and other entities as well. So when you are having to do manual or semi-manual work to manage lifecycle events or corporate actions, these costs become disproportionate when it's a low value transfer or low volume trade, if you have these manual processes, and how can you automate those to a point where it becomes economic to service the small business, to even service a participant? And when you do that, you can then look at enhancing market liquidity because you've reduced the cost, you've made the market more efficient, and you can help develop that market to expand its reach, to become more liquid, to provide more ways for these assets to be bought and sold.
Great. Great. Well, and Belén, pivoting over to you, you and your community that you've worked closely with for years are far, far away from Wall Street. And in some ways, your work has been affected by Wall Street and, just Western lifestyles, right, that are consumer-based, consumption-based. And we're trying, I think as a whole, trying to provide legibility or make it readable for people to understand the value of the environment to everyday life, to the basic fundamental civic institutions, everyday business. Every transaction is really built on top of healthy ecological systems and the people who steward them. So for you, I know you've worked with us at Regen Network in utilizing blockchain to start to develop the right relationship between communities in the Amazon and the Western world and global northern capital. Can you explain a little bit more about some of the issues facing, or some of the things you like to make sure folks are seeing for the ancestral land stewards in the Amazon, here on Earth Day, some of the issues they're facing, and why you're excited about the possibility of blockchain to help you and your communities develop the right relationship on your terms with other folks in the world who want to protect the planet?
Sure, Dave, and hi, everyone. Happy to see you all in this space to celebrate Mother Earth and what we have every day from this relationship we have with her. And in the Amazon region, what we have seen lately, I would say the last 5 years, is like an acceleration of everything what can be happening in the Amazon in these times. That is also happening in the region. It's not just localized in one place. So what we see is that the deforestation is happening in rates that we haven't seen in the past, and loss of biodiversity. And definitely we see that illegal mining is also trapping the people and also threatening the environment with such the using of mercury in the waters. In addition of what is a tradition for the Ecuadorian government, that is extractive industries, expanding oil blocks development and big scale mining into these very high biodiversity places on Earth. So I'm referring to the central south area of the Amazon region in Ecuador. And the chance that I have to work with the scientific panel of the Amazon, which I am part of it, is that we are working towards put some solutions and recommendations to COP30 and to governments and private sector and academic sector and civil societies, like trying to put out some recommendations about how important it is to establish connectivity issues through these regions, disruptions, ecological disruptions, hydrological disruptions, how we take in account all these elements that are affecting the livelihoods of the indigenous peoples, the livelihoods of the ecosystems. And in order to put out some, I'll say, action items or action calls to the world in this moment, we see that it's very important to work with alternatives as a blockchain, as what we have been doing with Regen Network the last 3-4 years now, is that work with indigenous peoples in the ground, in the territories. It has been a really rich experience, because definitely what we do is look to give in the first hand an alternative that will bring capacity building in the communities, use technology and to use different kind of instruments and tools that will help, especially the young people, to start to start like participating in a full way about what is to have a job in the forest. So this is a very important thing, because there are young people in the Xaramensa community. They are not going out from the communities to be in the cities of the Amazon looking for job, but they have a job and they have an income to stay in the community. Plus, from the biodiversity credits sellings, the community has financial plans that they can invest in emergencies, in health, in solutions that will bring like definitely more improvements in their livelihoods. They are being trained in, of course, how to use drones, equipment, smartphones to collect data, to bring all these efforts to see how artificial intelligence will work also to find ways to see where are the specific biodiversity species that we are looking at, like in this case, the jaguar. And they also are combining this with their own technology. So we don't have to forget about the indigenous wisdom, the indigenous technology that has been there for thousands of years. So blockchain is just like connecting with this technology that is the dream way of thinking, the dream sharing, the technology that they have in the way that they connect with nature. So this is definitely a way to scale, a way to expand. Like, is to me, I've seen like more growing in this participation and hope that the indigenous people have in these kind of activities, that in carbon credits, because it will take more time for a community, like 5 to 7 years, to start like seeing some of the profits from that activity. But with blockchain for conservation and for jaguar, especially for the jaguar species as an umbrella species of this project, they see that they have every year a plan, so they can implement with their own needs solutions, and they will start receiving that income from protecting biodiversity and learning from biodiversity and connecting with indigenous traditions, and also being in the front lines, defending the forest from a road building or from deforestation or from any alert that they find around their territories. And so for now, I'll leave the information there, but I am very happy with the working with technologies for conservation in the tropical rainforest and with indigenous peoples.
Wonderful. Well said, Belén. Drew, back over to you. I mean, I think what Belén really speaks to, is a really special opportunity of how we use cutting edge technologies like AI and blockchain to provide the ability, I keep using the term, develop right relationships between land stewards around the world, smallholder farmers, agriculturalists, indigenous communities, to develop their own version and their own bioregions of what it means to protect their lands and incorporate their own needs as a community, right? So it's not necessarily being defined and driven simply by power brokers and boardrooms in the global north, but is actually emergent in the global south, and blockchain can allow for that. I'd be curious if you had comments or thoughts on how you see blockchain scaling and really being a vector for driving massive amounts of capital into communities in the Amazon or into the global south, or even into farmers. Like, what does it look like for the people who are on the land every day to make a connection to organizations or to ultimately benefit from groups like Carbonmark? Like, what is the unlock that you feel is possible with growth and adoption of blockchain as a core-based technology for the scaling of nature markets?
It's an interesting question. I think there's two parts to that that I'd like to cover. One is, how do we empower, let's say local project developers or smaller scale projects to actually get to market quickly? And the second part is, how can blockchain actually increase what I like to think of as the overall velocity of the market, the speed at which capital can then go back to the project developers themselves? So the first part is, how do we empower the developers? Well, I think there's some really interesting work ongoing with, for example, digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, or DMRV processes, to basically speed up the auditing process and also to lower costs when it comes to the verification of the processes themselves. Now, I recently spoke to a project developer that's doing work with soil carbon sequestration, and they have an analogy that I really like, and where essentially, rather than validating and verifying each piece of paper coming out of a printing press, what we want to do is we actually want to validate the printing press itself. So if we have a specific methodology or a piece of hardware, essentially in the blockchain lingo, like an oracle that's collecting data, and that is standardized and that can be deployed by people, well, then we don't need to go through these processes that we do today, where, for example, for a nature-based project, it may be that you're only able to do a verification every 2 to 3 years because you need to visit the field, you need to do manual measurements of certain things and so on. And yes, that work can be important, especially for, let's say, biodiversity assessments and so on. But there are avenues available to us to really speed up and lower the cost of that data collection. So that's the one piece, and that's going to unlock a lot more projects to actually be able to develop themselves. And if you have those credits streaming in from that data collection, rather than doing these things every 2 to 3 years, well, then you do have an asset that you can already sell to recoup your capital and essentially expand your project and thus expand the impact that you're having on the environment and the local communities. And that brings me to the second part, which is, okay, how do we just increase the velocity of this market overall? I'll speak real quick just about a interesting use case, I think, when it comes to, again, smart contracts and such. There are companies that are starting to do automated carbon accounting, where they're looking at emissions from, for example, logistics companies, supply chain transfers, and so on. And they're collecting that data in essentially real time. Now, what you can do through having these assets on the blockchain, through smart contracts and building, some APIs, like Carbonmark has an API currently for this, is that then you can match that emissions data in real time with assets that are on the blockchain to essentially compensate for those emissions. And of course, you can program this. You could say for supply chain transfers taking place in a certain country, you only want to support projects that are originated in that country. But the important thing here is that we have this availability of information. We know what carbon credits are there. We know where they came from. We know the pricing and so on. And you can automate the purchase and the retirement flows and so on. So once you start to do that, I think, one, you're going to speed up the capital going back to the projects. And two, and maybe this is the more interesting kind of wider scope point, we are able to then really understand these external costs of our economic activity, because we'll have a pricing on the carbon credits and we can match things in real time. And therefore, our economic system, in a way, can act more intelligently, really, in maintaining climate stability and delivering capital to these projects that are so crucial, for the Earth and for being able to just continue economically without all these adverse effects that we're already starting to see.
Lovely. Rohan, here at Regen Network, we've long said that our goal is to make ecological health legible to economic models and economic policy. It feels like we've externalized for a number of years, and I think not out of necessarily ill will or malice, but out of just as we've learned more about the fundamental role that healthy ecology or healthy ecological systems play in everyday, or how important they are for everyday business operations, right? Supply chains, incredibly important to the global economy and incredibly, as we've seen, at extensive risk for disruption in a time of climate volatility. I think, obviously issues around clean air and clean water and how those end up showing up not just through regulatory or policy enforcement, but how do you make these issues legible to markets? If we are understanding that the capitalism framework is going to continue to drive the global economy, which primarily revolves around consumption of goods, and how do we make Earth get on the balance sheet? How do we put Earth on the balance sheet so that when major corporations and companies and institutions, when they are making decisions about how they interact with the world, how they consume, how they bring products to the market, how do we bring ecological health into those decisions, every day. So I think, you've touched on a little bit Nasdaq's early leadership in, as one of the leading institutions, market-based institutions in the world around carbon registries. Do you have a sense of either from being in the inside or again, even in your particular world on what the next wave of technology development or even shifts in sentiment and how Nasdaq might show up or provide leadership or other things that you're seeing around Nasdaq that give you some hope here on Earth Day around how we provide, the world's ability to bring ecology onto the balance sheet?
Absolutely, David. So I suppose a key goal for Nasdaq is how do we achieve integration of carbon markets and with the existing financial infrastructure. And the reason we want to do that is we want to bring these markets onto the balance sheets, as you say, of the traditional players in this space. And you can always just look at that from a technical point of view. You can develop and implement well-designed interfaces, but it also comes down to standards. So actually, what is the goal? The goal is to provide solutions that allow the carbon market to become a standardized, trusted ecosystem. And if you can do that, then you will be able to have the high quality liquidity coming from institutional investors into the carbon market more regularly, more volume, more cash, more capital. And of course, you can provide the solutions for that. Our aim with the product is to provide that institutional grade digital asset technology, which can then support the carbon market and solve those operational problems which lead to it having slow settlement times and challenging delivery through facilitating quicker settlement, automatic processing of the events, which hopefully will then drive greater liquidity across carbon marketplaces, then maybe across traditional marketplaces. And it's all around interoperability between the registries, the carbon market, and the traditional financial space. And a key focus for us isn't now just the assets. We also want to focus on other parts of the life cycle. And the area we are now looking at is the pre-issuance area. And this goes back to what Drew was actually talking about, because actually a challenging part is suppliers, onboarding, origination. It's very complex. There's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of having to check information, fill out forms, all this sort of stuff. And if you can digitize these processes, maybe you are connecting to oracles to receive trusted information, data points, verified credentials, et cetera, then the product and the solutions can automate more. They can improve speed and efficiency, provide greater transparency well before these credits are issued. And it just creates a more efficient market, creates more trust, it creates more transparency, and it will create more incentive for people with the money to invest. And that's where we are looking to extend our capabilities today to provide expanded coverage of the operational complexities of carbon markets, not just for the assets that already exist or have been issued, but pre-issuance in the origination part as well, because that's where we see there is a lot of problems in that area. And we continue to tackle the problems on the settlement and life cycles phase as too.
Awesome. Belén, pivoting back to you, one of the areas that it feels like is an exciting space for the future of carbon markets and nature markets is around governance, is the ability for the communities that are being asked to or already have a culture of stewardship of land and now are desiring to bring in capital to support that ongoing stewardship, have often previously been subject to the terms and the conditions provided by the folks who have the capital. As I understand, what blockchain, is one of our promises, and Drew, I'd love to get your take on this as well, just as a blockchain advocate. What I understand is that we can design what governance looks like to show communities who are interested in supporting Amazonian conservation, that the governance can sit with the communities themselves in the design of these ecological assets and the design of how these communities are organizing themselves, what they value, and how they incorporate that into an investable asset like a credit or a unit. Can you speak more to helping people understand how important governance is to communities in Amazonia, what it looks like, whereas we're used to like quick decisions and, computer emails back and forth. What does it look like to sit in the asamblea, to sit in assembly, to sit in community, to sit in and make decisions that then may show up into a contract or into a blockchain that is permanently setting the rules and terms that were set by these communities who are conserving these lands or protecting them. Can you speak a little bit more to what that looks like and feels like, so people understand, on Wall Street it may look like this, but in the Amazon it looks different, and it's important to recognize and provide space to show what that looks like.
Yeah, sure, Dave. Well, we need to see first that in Ecuador, in Peru, and Colombia, and Brazil, in Bolivia, in Venezuela, indigenous people's rights are included in a very good way in our constitutions. So in a country as Ecuador, in a country as Peru or Colombia, we must follow it's a must to protect collective rights. It's a must to follow the instructions and see what is the best way to approach in every project the principles and the process that we need to take in order to fulfill these rights. So in order to tackle different aspects of this new projects happening, first we need to see that it's very important to follow what we call the free, prior, and consultation process. That means that the community that is going to be involved in one of these projects should be not just consulted, but informed about what will be the benefits, what will be the impacts of these projects that should be related with nature-based solutions, with extractive industries, with education, with investments. So that's a first step that is a must, to follow some principles, guiding principles on collective rights. And it's not difficult. Actually, that's part of the governance of the indigenous people and their territories. They have a high-level segment where they go participate and make decisions for their territories. And this is called the Asamblea, where all the members of this community, the leaders of the community, will make sure that they will bring all the voices in the decision-making process, and they will make decisions for a year, for the financial plan of the community, for education, for health, for emergencies, and even to find ways to punish people who's not behaving well in the community. So this Asamblea and also practices as having meetings really early in the morning, as the Guayusa time, where people gather together to find solutions that really early in the morning, is part of the governance of the community. So there is not just one aspect of the governance, but different aspects on the government that are related to the cultures that we are going to work with. What we do with this is that we also, this is the result of being like paying attention on governance principles in these communities, help us to bring more transparency in the whole process. Transparency in the community, because the MRB systems will be used and the technology will be used by leaders from the community, men and women, to find a better way to record data that will be then watched inside and outside to put out alerts and avoid deforestation or loss of biodiversity or any threat that they are facing in this moment. So transparency also will help the project outside to find ways that avoid leakage, to find ways to avoid carve out doing investments that will be like duplicated in other places, to find out that the donors, the investors, the people who's working in cryptocurrencies will have transparency in all the value chain of the project. Also, we need to pay attention on that direct access funds is also a must that comes with all the negotiations of biodiversity conventions and climate change conventions that are asking us in this moment that indigenous people must participate in a full way in the design of the project with investors, with the local government, with the federal government, with the national government, because in a way, this is how we are going to start creating like the new paths of transparency, governance, direct access funds for indigenous peoples and full participation that will allow us to create pilots and demonstrators to the region. So in a way, if we understand this first step very clearly, the investments will be easy then to expand into different territories, as we are working with Regen now in a territory of 10,000 hectares for 3 years. Knowing all these principles allowed us to expand into a region of 100,000 hectares, that is the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Basin Communities and Alliance that is in Peru and in Ecuador. And that's our hope, to go in 5 years from now and expand the Jaguar Credits blockchain experience to a whole region with all these principles. So governance, land titling is something very specific, very, very important in the region. We need to support those actions with indigenous peoples, consultation process, and informed and consulted processes for any project. Direct access, so indigenous people can have direct access for the design of the project, and then to receive the funds to implement activities in their territories. They know how to use that money for education, for health, for emergencies, for bring capacity building for the communities, for internet, for solutions that the government will never get into these places, because there are not a way that governments in our regions support with this kind of incomes. Even education or health is very difficult to find out in the local communities. So those will be the standards to strengthen and to enhance a good and transparent governance in the region.
Great, thank you for the response. We did get a question. Somebody asked in the Q&A, and by the way, if other folks have questions and questions, we'll do our best to answer them in these last 10 minutes or so. Somebody asked, could you please explain the rationale behind offering the Shara community credits at the lowest possible price? This decision sets a precedent that directly impacts all of us who are actively conserving forests, including the very communities you now aim to support. How does this align with long-term integrity and value of forest conservation efforts, both locally and globally? And I'm happy to give a response from Regen Network, and then Belén, if you have additional thoughts. So the original tranche of about what was developed of a tranche of about 73,000 or so were called pre-finance credits. And essentially what these were was it took the 10,000 hectares, the amount of resources that were required to monitor, to report, and to provide resources to the Shara community to develop the actual methodology and finalize the actual methodology. This was the amount of capital, which I think equated to about $63,000 or so, that they requested in order to continue the process of actually developing a full-blown credit, which is still in process. So just to be clear, so these, I think essentially what people contributed to was they contributed to the development and support of a community that was developing their own credit or unit, in this case, Shara. The capital was clearly laid out at about $63,000 over 10,000 hectares. And that when the credits were actually issued, each one of those folks who contributed would get a proportional number of the final credit created. So that 88 cents per credit, which for those of who were interested, that's what the initial pre-finance credit would cost, is actually not the cost of the true credit. It was the amount of money required to continue the process. So when the ultimate credits are issued, I expect that they'll be pretty far north or high above their original pre-finance credit price. So it's not the actual cost of the credit yet. You contributed to a process to develop the actual credit that will be issued in the near term. So Belén, if you have any other comments or questions around that, I appreciate the concern of just make sure we're not underselling the true cost of what it means to conserve a forest and support communities like Xara Mensa, and making sure that there's no unintentional undercutting going on. So Belén, any other reflections there before we move on?
Yeah, well, I just 2 weeks ago I was visiting Xara Mensa, but also a community. Xara Mensa, for the ones that doesn't know, is in the Lower Pastaza, and is a community that still is surrounded by living forest. They have not been impacted by any extractive industry there, so they have a different life from a different community in Morona, Santiago, Shuar community that I also visited 3 weeks ago, that was already hit by the road, but by the building of a road 10 years ago. So if you can see the difference between a community that was very look like this actual community 10 years ago, and it's not longer like that because deforestation has been hitting this place. There are not, like a lot of deforestation has happened there. There's a lot of dependency on the roads now to sell the last products they have around. They are really affecting the culture of the community. And they are looking at, with them, we are looking at reforestation and restoration projects, a high integrity carbon project to be set in this place so we can recover 10,000 hectares in the next years. And the modality of the work that we are going to do that is different, because in the first 5 to 6 years, what we need is to invest in the people that will be doing reforestation, taking out the cattle out from those places, bringing some ideas on bioeconomy, agroforestry, compensate the people for what they are going to do in the next 5 years until we get funds for a project that will last for 30 years and will bring returns, interesting returns for the people and for the local governments. But in the case of Xara Mensa, in the place where a road is very close to this place of Xara Mensa. So what we are trying to do right now with the Jaguar Credits Initiative is to slow down that process, to take that road out from this place, because we don't want to replicate what happened in the Shuar territory. But we need to see that, to start doing a robust system of MRB, to start a process with the community to make sure that we are like performing a good capacity building, to have the tools with the youth, with technology, with the new equipment, with the using of internet, to learn how women and men can be participating in the project in the same way, is a process. So in the communities, you start like baby steps. You cannot just like bring all the technology, all the money, all the funds, all the financial mechanisms. And that's also what we are trying to do in this region, to create a financial facility for the bioregion that includes blockchain, that includes Jaguar Credits as a solution for the protection of the living forest. This is not a deforested forest, it's living forest, it's still biodiversity. Forest carbon sinks are there because the way that the Achuar, they have been protecting their forest. So to me, it's very important to share in this, especially in this question, especially that the value of the credit is relative. One thing is what happened with carbon projects. One thing is what's happening now in the first phase of the Jaguar Credit Initiative, but in the next year, we need, of course, to raise that number, because the communities, they need and they deserve to be compensated, and also to receive this kind of acknowledge from what they are doing for all of us.
Thank you, Belén. So in our last few minutes here, Drew, it's Earth Day, April 22nd, 2025. It's Earth Day. Carbonmark is leaving its mark on the world. What are you excited about? What do you want to share as a parting thought for those of you wondering, for those people wondering about the intersection of blockchain and sustainability? Give us a parting word from the Carbonmark perspective.
Sure. Thanks, David. Look, I think we've never been better positioned as sort of an industry of blockchain and climate than we are today. You have a lot of feedback from registries that are either starting to use blockchain technology or they're kind of building that interoperability. And what that's going to lead to is that there's going to be this shared infrastructure layer that we can all build on together. One of the reasons that this whole DeFi landscape is such a wellspring of innovation is because you have people building on the same shared infrastructure. And so there's a lot of novel things that can be done, can be created to ultimately direct more finance or open up new blue market opportunities for financing to flow, whether it's through the carbon market or biodiversity credits, whatever it may be. But there's that opportunity to catch that activity and all that creative potential and direct it towards those initiatives, which offer sustainable solutions. So it's an exciting time. There's a lot more work to be done. Just as a last word, I would say, the reason that DeFi is also very innovative is because you have people kind of sharing and building together. It is a very collaborative community. And I think that's an important value for all of us to have in the market as we continue onwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Drew and Carbonmark. Appreciate you being here today. Rohan, some parting words from the Nasdaq community. How are you feeling April 2025 Earth Day? What are you excited about? And give us something to be hopeful about.
I think that Drew's right in we are seeing the infrastructure which has held back the carbon market is beginning to transform, and we're seeing a lot of the established players also starting to move on to more advanced technologies, and that this will lead to us having more carbon-backed financial products, and those products will allow more capital to flow into the carbon market from the traditional financial markets. We'll have yield-generating products except tied to sustainability goals, and we'll have traditional markets starting to take more of an active role in facilitating carbon trade, and that will just lead to the market continuing to grow.
Wonderful. And Belén, thank you for joining us and for all your work at Fundación Pachamama and helping to be a critical organizing community for those folks who've been protecting our rainforests and our really important ecological lands for ages now. What are you hopeful about in moving forward on Earth Day 2025? What is exciting you? What is making what's inspiring you when it comes to the future of protecting the planet?
Yes, I see that we need to look at connectivity in the region. We need to connect also connectivity and avoid disruptions, ecological disruptions and cultural disruptions through these kind of technologies. So I think there is a lot of comprehensive and an important way to connect technology, indigenous wisdom and technology, plus the understanding of the ecological ways that tipping point is affecting to the region. And this is something that will scale up very fast. Once we have all these principles of governance, transparency, confidence, because we are in this adaptation moment, we need to scale, and in order to scale, we need to innovate. And what we have been doing with the Jaguar credits is that innovating a way to do a great a pilot project that will scale very, very fast in the next 5 years. So I'm really enthusiastic of what's going to happen and how we're going to see avoiding deforestation and not losing biodiversity in these very important places for Earth.
Wonderful. Rohan, Belén, and Drew, thank you so much for being here. And a big shout to the Global Blockchain Business Council team for putting this on and creating a venue for us to explore some really important concepts around what does it look like to use markets, to use technology, to scale ecological repair and regeneration. I'm Dave Fortson. I'm the Chief Growth Officer of Regen Network Development. Really grateful to be here today with all of you, and thank you for your contributions. And all of you who attended, please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us at our organizations or contact the GBBC team to get a hold of us. But in the meantime, go and regenerate, be good to each other, and have a great Earth Day 2025. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.